I never thought I would be standing alone in the quiet of my own home, the walls echoing memories that belonged to two people now gone. When my husband died, it wasn't just his presence that vanished. It was the rhythm of my life, the comfort of knowing someone always had my back. Everything felt heavier, like I was carrying the weight of a life I hadn't fully understood until it was gone. I remember the first night after the funeral, lying awake in the dark, the emptiness pressing in on me, and wondering how anyone could feel so alone surrounded by reminders of love. My brother, who had always been close, came over the next day. He didn't say much at first, just held my hand and let me cry, which I appreciated more than I could ever put into words. I had always trusted him, relied on him in ways I never admitted to anyone else. He had been my confidant through childhood, the one who always made me laugh when life felt impossible. And now he was the only person who could anchor me when everything else had slipped away. There was comfort in that, a familiarity that felt safe against the rawness of grief. Even in those early days, I sensed something shifting. The way he lingered a little longer than necessary, the soft intensity in his gaze, the quiet patience that seemed to carry a weight beyond concern for a sister. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself that grief makes people cling to each other, that I was just imagining things. But the nagging feeling wouldn't leave. And then came the day when he asked me something that made me freeze, something I could barely even process. I remember the words, though I wish I didn't. They were careful, almost casual, but underneath lay a gravity I wasn't ready for. I wanted to laugh or cry or run, but instead I just stared at him, trying to measure the distance between who he was and what he was asking. How could the person I had trusted most be the one to challenge everything I believed about loyalty, love, and boundaries? The shock felt like a physical blow, and yet there was an undeniable pull, a curiosity I couldn't ignore. In the quiet that followed, I replayed every memory of us together, searching for a hint, a clue, anything that could explain this impossible moment. My grief made my mind fragile, vulnerable, more sensitive than it had ever been, and I realized just how much I had depended on him without acknowledging it. And now, faced with this unbelievable request, I understood that my life had entered a chapter one had never imagined, one where desire, loyalty, and morality collided in ways I wasn't prepared to navigate. I didn't answer him immediately. I couldn't. The shock was too immense, the confusion too real. Instead, I let the silence stretch, hoping that somehow the absurdity of the moment would dissolve if I waited long enough. But it didn't. It lingered, hanging in the air like a question with no answer, a decision I wasn't sure I could make. That day, I realized my life had irrevocably changed. Nothing about the future would be the same, and the trust one had once taken for granted was now entangled in something far more complicated and dangerous than I could have imagined. The days after his request were unbearable. Every time I thought I had a grip on reality, his words replayed in my mind, impossible to ignore. I kept asking myself how someone so familiar could suddenly feel like a stranger, how the bond one had trusted for a lifetime could become tangled in something unthinkable. Grief had left me raw, exposed, and now that rawness made me vulnerable to emotions I hadn't anticipated. Confusion, guilt, and a strange, inexplicable pull toward someone I had always seen as family. I tried to rationalize it. He had just lost his brother-in-law, just as I had lost my husband. Maybe it was loneliness, a need for comfort, a way to lean on each other when the world felt cruel. But the clarity of his words and the intensity behind them refused to let me believe it was just grief. He wasn't asking for a simple favor or for company. He was asking for something far deeper, something I wasn't sure I could ever consider without feeling like I had betrayed everything I had ever held sacred. First, I wanted to ignore him, to pretend I hadn't heard the words at all, but the silence only made the tension grow. Every conversation felt like a test, every message a reminder of what had been proposed. I found myself second-guessing every memory, wondering if there had been signs I missed, small moments that now seemed loaded with intention. I realized my heart was being pulled in ways I hadn't acknowledged, and the guilt of even thinking about it was suffocating. I couldn't deny that there was a strange comfort in his presence. His support was unwavering, his attention intense, and there were moments when it felt like he understood me in ways no one else could. But along with that comfort came fear. Fear of crossing a line I couldn't uncross, fear of losing myself entirely in a situation that had no precedent, and fear that I would look back on this and regret it forever. The conflict was constant, a storm in my mind I couldn't quiet. I spent sleepless nights turning over every possibility, weighing the consequences of saying yes or no, trying to determine if I had the strength to refuse without shattering the fragile connection that had become my lifeline. Each option seemed unbearable. Saying yes felt like a betrayal of everything I loved about my husband, yet saying no risked losing the only person who seemed to anchor me in a world that had suddenly grown cold and empty. The moral line I had once been certain of now felt hazy, shifting under the weight of grief, desire, and fear. And yet, despite the turmoil, part of me couldn't stop thinking about what it would be like to give in, to see if the forbidden connection could fill the void left by loss. That thought alone terrified me, made me question my own morality, and yet it was impossible to ignore. I realized that this wasn't just about a request, it was about the fragility of human emotion, the way loss can distort judgment, and the way trust, when twisted, can create a battlefield inside the heart. By the end of those endless days, I knew one thing with certainty. I couldn't avoid this choice forever. Whatever I decided, the consequences would be irrevocable, and the path forward would test everything I thought I knew about loyalty, love, and the boundaries we set for ourselves. I had crossed into a territory I wasn't prepared for, and the tension between desire and morality had only begun. The day I had been dreading arrived, whether I wanted it or not. He looked at me with that same intensity, calm on the surface but with a vulnerability I couldn't ignore. There was no hesitation in his eyes, only expectation, and I realized that the moment of decision had finally come. My heart was pounding, my thoughts racing, and every instinct screamed that crossing this line could change everything I had ever believed about myself. I remembered the vows I had made, the promises that had anchored my life, and yet they clashed violently with the loneliness and yearning that had grown unbearable. It wasn't just desire. It was the desperate search for comfort in a world that had been stripped bare of stability. Every fiber of me wanted to run, to say no and put an end to the impossible tension, but a part of me, the part one didn't dare admit, wanted to see if giving in could fill the emptiness that grief had left behind. Flashbacks hit me suddenly. Small moments with my husband, the way he used to hold my hand, the laughter we shared, the quiet nights that felt like safety. And alongside them, memories of my brother, the unspoken closeness that had always existed, now charged with a new, forbidden energy. The contrast was dizzying, and I felt myself teetering on the edge between loyalty and temptation. The moral compass I had trusted was spinning wildly, leaving me disoriented, unsure if I could even trust my own judgment. That he spoke softly, carefully, explaining why he felt this way, why he thought it might be acceptable in the fragile space between loss and grief. His words were persuasive, logical even, and I felt the lines blur further. I wanted to trust him, to believe that what he was suggesting wasn't a betrayal but a misguided attempt to comfort me. Yet deep down, I knew that giving in would carry consequences I couldn't fully imagine. Every argument in his favor only heightened my anxiety. Every pause made the weight of the decision more unbearable. I realized then that this choice wasn't about desire alone. It was about control, about boundaries, about understanding who I was in the aftermath of loss. My mind raced through every scenario, every possible outcome, and the fear of regret clawed at me. Saying yes could destroy the memory of my husband, my sense of self, and possibly our entire family dynamic. Saying no could distance the one person who had remained by my side, leaving me completely alone in my grief. There was no safe option, no path without consequence, only the pressure of a decision that would define the next chapter of my life. When I finally spoke, it was deliberate, firm, and measured, the culmination of every thought, every flashback, every pulse of fear and longing. I knew that no matter what I chose, the aftermath would test me in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. And as the words left my lips, a part of me understood that nothing would ever feel the same again. The unspoken tension, the forbidden desire, the moral conflict, it wasn't over. It had only reached its breaking point, and the consequences of that moment would ripple through every aspect of my life. The aftermath of my decision was heavier than I could have imagined. Even after the choice was made, my mind kept circling every word, every gesture, and every consequence that could follow. There was relief, yes, a strange lightness that came from setting a boundary I knew I couldn't compromise. But there was also an ache, a hollow space where uncertainty and guilt lingered, reminding me that nothing about this situation was simple or without consequence. I realized that grief wasn't just sadness, it was a trap, a force that could make the impossible seem attainable. even when it went against everything I had known to be right. Our interactions changed immediately. There was an unspoken tension that neither of us addressed directly, but it hovered in every conversation, every message, every attempt at casual connection. I could feel his restraint, the way he measured words and glances, and I understood that the line we had approached would always exist in the background, a reminder of temptation and morality colliding. At the same time, I felt my own resolve strengthening, a cautious pride in knowing I had faced something unimaginable and come out with my integrity intact. I began to reflect on my own vulnerability, realizing how grief had clouded my judgment and made me susceptible to emotions I wouldn't have allowed under normal circumstances. It wasn't just about him or his request, it was about me, about how loss can expose the deepest corners of the heart, forcing difficult choices that test who you are and who you want to be. I had been forced to confront desires I never expected and boundaries I thought were unshakable, and surviving that confrontation left me more aware, more cautious, and more certain of what I valued. Family dynamics shifted subtly as well. I noticed the way others responded to my decisions, the cautious distance or heightened sensitivity from relatives who sensed tension but didn't understand the full story. There was a fragile balance in maintaining relationships while protecting my own emotional stability, a constant awareness that every action had the potential to ripple outward. I realized that navigating life after loss wasn't just about surviving grief. It was about managing consequences, understanding people's motivations, and protecting the delicate space of my own heart. In the end, I learned something crucial about myself. Strength isn't just about enduring pain. It's about making impossible choices, setting boundaries, and refusing to compromise your core values, even when everything else in your world has changed. I emerged from that period with a clearer understanding of my limits, my resilience, and the complexities of human desire. The trust between me and my brother was forever altered, yes, but there was also a renewed sense of clarity about where love ends and morality begins. I understood that grief can push us to the edge, but it doesn't have to define who we are or the choices we make. Even now, the memory lingers, a reminder that some moments in life demand more courage than we ever thought we possessed. The experience taught me that temptation, loyalty, and moral responsibility exist in fragile balance, and that navigating them requires honesty, self-awareness, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. I survived, not unscathed but wiser, and I carry that lesson forward, knowing that strength is born not from ease, but from the choices we make when the world shifts beneath our feet.